The supper rush at Cranbrook Station Diner always had a particular sound to it, the clatter of ceramic mugs, the hiss of the griddle, the low hum of conversations layering over each other until the whole place felt like it was breathing. Owen Callard had been coming here every Thursday evening for 3 years, ever since his daughter Josie decided Thursday was their night. She was 9 now, old enough to order her own hot chocolate, and young enough to still think it was an adventure. He was watching her try to read the laminated menu upside down, a habit she had developed for reasons he never fully understood, when he noticed the woman at table 4. She was probably in her late 20s, carrying 2 plates and a bowl of soup balanced on her forearm with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Her hair was pinned back unevenly, one strand loose across her cheek, and her name tag read Sandra in the kind of font that looked cheerful against the reality of a double shift. She had just set the plates down carefully when the man in the navy blazer pushed back from the table without warning. The bowl of soup went sideways. It didn't shatter. She caught it, but the liquid sloshed across her wrist and down the front of her apron, and the man in the navy blazer looked at the table as though she had done it deliberately. "Is this a joke?" he said. "Not loud. Just loud enough." Owen set down his coffee. The man, late 50s, silver hair combed with precision, the kind of watch that costs more than most people's car payments, looked at the woman the way certain people look at things they consider inconveniences rather than human beings. "I asked for the soup first. This is basic." The woman, Sandra, apologized immediately, quietly, the way people apologize when they know it doesn't matter because the other person has already decided on the outcome. She reached for the bowl to take it back, and the man made a sound, a short exhale through the nose, theatrical disgust. "Don't touch it now. You've already handled it." Josie had stopped pretending to read the menu. Owen had spent 14 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, 2 deployments overseas, and the last 4 years since his discharge running a small HVAC service company out of Kelowna with a 4-person crew. He knew how to read a room. He knew the difference between someone having a bad day and someone using a bad day as permission. The man in the navy blazer was not having a bad day. He was simply behaving the way he always behaved when he believed nobody who mattered was watching. Owen stood. He didn't plan it exactly. He just found himself standing the way he had stood in situations overseas when something wrong was happening and waiting felt worse than acting. He crossed the diner in 11 steps. He counted without meaning to, and stopped beside table 4. "Everything okay here?" he asked, not to the man, to Sandra. She looked at him quickly, a flash of something, surprise, calculation, something he couldn't name, before she lowered her eyes again. "It's fine, I was just." "She spilled soup on my table," the man said, turning to Owen as though Sandra had stopped existing. "I don't see how that's your concern." Owen looked at him steadily. Seemed like it was becoming loud enough to be everyone's concern. The man's expression shifted into something polished and patient, the kind of patience that isn't patience at all, but contempt managing itself. He glanced at Owen's jacket, Callard Mechanical, the name on the breast pocket, the worn cuffs, and seemed to arrive at several conclusions simultaneously. "I think you should return to your table," he said. "I think you should lower your voice," Owen replied. The diner had gone quiet. Not silent. The griddle still hissed, the overhead speakers still played something old and country. But the human noise had dropped out in that particular way it does when people are pretending harder not to listen. "Do you have any idea," the man said slowly, as though selecting each word for maximum effect, "who you're speaking to?" Owen glanced once toward Josie, who had both hands flat on the table, and was watching him with the serious, focused expression she wore when she was trying to decide whether to be scared or proud. He turned back. "I know what kind of man I'm speaking to," Owen said. "That's enough." A muscle moved in the man's jaw. His name, Owen would learn later, was Warren Delacourt, Senior Vice President of Regional Development for a company called Meridian Lakeshore Properties, which owned or held leases on approximately 40% of the commercial properties in the valley. He had the kind of power that had never been challenged in a diner by someone wearing a company jacket and work boots, and that unfamiliarity showed now as something close to disbelief. He reached forward and gripped the edge of Sandra's tray, still in her hands, and pulled, hard enough that she stumbled half a step before her grip tightened. Owen's hand closed around Delacourt's wrist before he understood he had moved. The grip was not violent, it was precise, firm enough to stop, nothing else. "Let go of it," Owen said quietly. For a suspended second, Delacourt stared at Owen's hand on his wrist the way someone stares at something that has violated a rule they assumed was absolute. Then his face changed completely. The management fell away. What was underneath it was colder. "You just made a serious mistake," he said. Owen released him and stepped back, enough to make clear he was choosing restraint. "Go home, sir." Delacourt straightened his cuff with two precise movements. He looked once at Sandra, not with anger, with something worse, with dismissal, and then he looked at Owen with the calm of someone who doesn't need to win the moment, because they can arrange to win everything that comes after it. "I own the lease on this building," Delacourt said, loudly enough now that no one could pretend not to hear. "I also hold the maintenance contracts for 4 commercial properties in Kelowna." He paused. Held. Owen felt it land somewhere in his chest. He kept his face still. Josie across the diner whispered, "Dad." Delacourt pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 40 seconds. Owen couldn't hear the specific words, only the tone. Professional, unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to consequences arriving for other people. He ended the call and slid the phone into his jacket pocket with the satisfaction of a man who has just signed something. He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at the owner, an older man named Gus who had appeared from the kitchen and stood now behind the counter with both hands pressed flat against it. "Gus, I trust you'll handle your staffing situation before my office calls tomorrow." Then he left. The bell above the door rang once. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sandra bent to pick up a napkin from the floor, and Owen crouched beside her automatically, gathering the rest. "You didn't need to do that," she said quietly. He put his hands on your tray. She looked at him directly for the first time, and Owen noticed her eyes. Not frightened. That was the thing. There was something precise in them, observational, the look of someone who was not experiencing this moment so much as cataloging it. "I've handled worse," she said. "That's not a reason to keep handling it." She almost smiled. Didn't quite. Josie appeared at Owen's elbow, holding a folded paper napkin in both hands. She held it out to Sandra with the gravity of a 9-year-old who has decided something matters. "For your wrist," Josie said. From the soup. Sandra looked at the napkin, then at Josie, and something shifted in her expression that had not shifted during any part of the confrontation with Delacourt. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the napkin. Gus appeared beside them. He looked at Owen with an expression that carried apology and resignation in equal measure. "Owen, he'll do it. He'll pull the lease review." Owen stood slowly. "I know, and the contracts? I know, Gus." Gus rubbed both hands over his face. "I'm sorry, I'll get you pie." Josie looked up immediately. "Can I get pie?" The question was so perfectly ordinary that the tension in the room cracked just slightly. Gus nodded with more relief than the situation warranted. Sandra was watching Owen again with that same careful attention. "You knew what he could do," she said. "Before you stood up, I had a reasonable idea, and you still— Some things cost more if you wait," Owen said simply. She looked at him for a moment too long before she nodded and turned back toward the counter. Owen's phone vibrated while Josie ate her pie. The first message was from his operations manager, Reed, sent 20 minutes ago. "Delacourt's office called. They're flagging our service access for the Meridian properties. What happened?" The second was from the property manager at the West Side complex. "Emergency call suspended pending review." "Sorry, man." The third was from an unknown number. "We've been made aware of tonight's incident. Do not contact this office." Owen set the phone face down on the table. Across the diner, Sandra was clearing table 4. She moved with efficiency, stacking plates, folding the cloth over the spill. But once, just once, she looked toward the window, and whatever she saw there made her pause for 3 seconds with a water glass in her hand before she continued. Owen followed her glance. A dark car was parked on the street. Engine running. Had been there since before Delacourt left. "Josie," he said carefully, "eat up." She looked at him the way she always did when she knew he was not telling her something. Then she took an enormous bite of pie. By 7 in the morning, Owen had 2 more cancellations and a voicemail from the city's commercial licensing office requesting a review of his bonding certificate. A process that normally took 2 minutes and was now apparently under reassessment. He stood in the kitchen of the house he rented in the South Slopes, holding a coffee he had forgotten to drink, while Josie ate cereal and drew a horse in her notebook. "You're doing the quiet thinking thing," she said without looking up. "What quiet thinking thing? The one where you stand in one spot and go away inside your head?" He looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of pale gray that looked silver in morning light. Her mother had been gone for 4 years now. The insurance company had taken 11 months to process the claim after the accident. 11 months during which Owen had learned that systems designed to protect people were also designed, in their fine print, to protect the companies running them. He had learned that lesson in a different way from most people. "I'm just thinking about work," he said. Josie drew a tail on the horse. "Is the man going to cause trouble?" Owen considered lying. He had always believed that children absorbed truth better than adults assumed, especially children who had already been through the harder versions of it. "He's trying to."
Can he?
For a little while. Josie nodded once, satisfied with the precision of that answer. She tore the horse drawing from her notebook and pushed it across the table. For your work truck, she said. He taped it to the fridge instead. He was dropping her at school when the silver car appeared. Not the dark sedan from last night. This one was newer, quieter, parked across from the school entrance. He noticed it the way he noticed most things. Peripherally, filed, not yet significant. It became significant when he saw Sandra step out of it. She was not wearing the diner uniform. Dark trousers, a gray coat, hair pulled back with a kind of neatness that suggested deliberate effort rather than habit. She wore small silver earrings and no name tag. She looked, Owen thought, like someone who dressed for one kind of day and was borrowing this neighborhood for purposes she had not yet disclosed. You tracked me here, he said. She didn't apologize for it. Your truck has your company name and a Kelowna address on the side. Your daughter's school was easy to infer. She paused. I needed to speak with you before Delacourt's office moves into the next phase. What's the next phase? He'll request a formal complaint hearing with the Regional Commercial Arbitration Board. He'll use the physical contact from last night, you holding his wrist, as the basis. By framing it as aggression, he eliminates the context and controls the outcome. Owen looked at her steadily. You talk like you know his processes. I know his process because it follows the same template every time. How many times have you seen it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Josie, who was watching from the truck window with her hands pressed to the glass. How many contracts did you lose this morning? Sandra asked. Owen's jaw tightened. 4, possibly 5 by afternoon. By noon, she said. 6, he'll finish the sweep before lunch because he doesn't like leaving things incomplete. Who are you? She turned back to him. Someone who needs you to trust me for about 4 more hours. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It isn't. She handed him a card. Plain white, just a phone number. No name, no logo. Don't call the arbitration board. Don't contact Delacourt's office. Don't respond to anything from the licensing review. Just wait. Then she got back in her car and drove. Owen stood on the sidewalk outside his daughter's school, holding a card with a phone number on it, which was either the beginning of something or the end of it, and he genuinely couldn't tell which. By 11 in the morning, he had lost 6 contracts. By 11:45, he received a message from Reed saying that 2 of their remaining clients had been called directly. Not by Delacourt's office, but by their landlords who had each received, separately, a notice about lease compliance audits scheduled for the following week. Owen sat in his truck outside the 3rd canceled job and stared at the mountains in the distance, the long ridge of them, the way they looked the same in every season of difficulty, and thought about his daughter's drawing of the horse taped to the refrigerator. His phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Callard. A voice he didn't recognize. Female, professional, careful. My name is Patricia Nairn. I'm calling from the Regional Business Ethics Board. We've received a report concerning Warren Delacourt. I understand you were present at Cranbrook Station Diner last evening. Would you be willing to make a statement? Owen leaned back. Who filed the report? A pause. I'm not at liberty to say, but the complaint involves a pattern of conduct, not solely last night's incident. You would be one of several witnesses. After he ended the call, he sat for a long time. Then he sent a text to the number on the card Sandra had given him. They called me, Ethics Board, is that you? The reply came in under a minute. Not directly, but it's connected. Can you come to an address in an hour? The address was a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Water Street that Owen had driven past 100 times without giving it particular thought. The lobby was the kind of lobby that didn't announce itself. Understated, efficient, real wood on the wall panels rather than veneer, and the woman at the desk greeted him by name before he had spoken. Sandra was already inside the conference room. She was standing at the window with a phone pressed to her ear, and she looked different again. The same woman, but occupying more of the space now, or occupying it differently, the way people shift when they're in a room they belong to rather than a room they're visiting. There were 2 other people at the table. A woman in her 60s with cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a younger man with a laptop open and a stack of printed documents beside it. Sandra ended her call and turned. Sit down, Owen, she said. There's a lot I owe you. He sat. He waited, she told him. Her full name was Sandra Teal, and she was not a waitress. She was the chief compliance officer of Meridian Lakeshore Properties. The company Warren Delacourt had spent 11 years building a private empire inside, using it as infrastructure for a network of lease manipulations, contractor suppression, and labor violations that had quietly destroyed dozens of small businesses across the interior, while the board reviewed quarterly numbers and called them growth. For 8 months, she had been conducting an internal investigation. The diner was one of 47 businesses operating under franchise pressure they didn't fully understand, paying hidden fees routed through maintenance sub-accounts, reporting problems to a complaint line that Delacourt's office controlled. She had taken the waitress shifts, borrowed the name Sandra from her grandmother, to observe the behavior that disappeared the moment anyone with authority entered a room. Owen listened to all of it. He listened the way he had learned to listen in briefings, without interrupting, processing. Delacourt knew an audit was happening, she said when she finished. He didn't know it was me. Owen looked at her for a long moment, and I stepped in the middle of it. You stepped in front of someone being treated badly, she said. That part is separate, is it? He kept his voice level. Because this morning it feels like it's very much the same thing. She met his eyes. She didn't look away. Yes, I know. The older woman with the reading glasses, Eleanor, Sandra introduced her from the ethics board, leaned forward. Mr. Callard. The board has enough for a formal hearing, but Delacourt's legal team will argue the complaint was triggered by a personal dispute. They'll use last night to paint you as the aggressor and Sandra as a compromised investigator. They'll request a delay, and delays in this process average 14 months, during which, Owen said, he keeps his position. During which, Eleanor confirmed he keeps his position. Silence. Owen thought about Reed, who had 3 kids and a mortgage in Rutland. He thought about Josie's drawing on the refrigerator. He thought about the soup on Sandra's wrist and the look on her face when Josie had handed her the napkin. Not the professional composure, the other thing, the brief human thing underneath it. What do you need from me? He asked. Sandra turned the laptop around. On the screen was a boardroom live stream, Meridian's emergency board session already in progress, called that morning by 3 members who had seen enough of the ethics board correspondence to panic. Delacourt will make his case in 40 minutes, she said. He's already submitted documentation characterizing last night as an assault by an unstable former military contractor. He submitted your service records. Owen's head came up. My service records are sealed. Selectively unsealed, said the man with the laptop. He used a regulatory variance tied to the commercial dispute. It's legally questionable. Ethically, it's what he does, Owen said quietly. He had seen the file himself years ago after his discharge. Months of treatment for acute stress response following an incident overseas that he had never fully described to anyone except one doctor in a closed office. The words in that file had been private in the way that only the worst things are private, not shameful but specific, irreducible, belonging to a context that could not survive being read aloud by someone who hadn't been there. Sandra was watching him with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite apology, but was something in the space between them. He plans to use it to suggest your judgment last night was compromised, she said. That the incident was not about protecting someone, but about a personal aggression pattern. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, can I speak at this board session? Eleanor glanced at Sandra. Sandra looked at Owen. Yes, she said, but it has to be now. The boardroom was on the 22nd floor of the same building, up an elevator that Owen rode in silence beside Sandra. She didn't speak. She seemed to understand that whatever was happening inside him needed the ride to itself. He was wearing the same jacket as last night. Callard mechanical across the breast pocket. He had not planned for a boardroom today when he got dressed this morning. The doors opened. 12 people around a long table. Some he didn't recognize. Some he recognized from photographs in the news. Local business leaders, 2 members of city council, the board chair of Meridian, a woman named Paulette, who looked at Owen's arrival with an expression he couldn't yet read. At the far end of the table, Warren Delacourt was leaning back in his chair with one ankle crossed over his knee. He looked at Owen the way he had looked at him in the diner, the same managed contempt, except here it was performative. He was showing the room how not threatened he was. Well, Delacourt said. The guest. Several board members shifted. One whispered to another. Sandra connected her device to the room screen without announcing it. The documents appeared: the lease manipulations, the contractor suppression records, the complaint line logs, the shell accounts. She let them be read before she spoke. What you're looking at, she said, is 11 years of systematic extraction from the businesses we claim to be supporting. Delacourt's lawyer interjected immediately. These documents have not been entered into formal. They will be, said Eleanor, who had entered behind them and taken a seat at the side wall with the particular stillness of someone who does not need to announce her authority. The board is entitled to review compliance findings at the request of the chief compliance officer. That is Miss Teal. Delacourt looked at Sandra then, really looked at her, and Owen watched the moment the understanding arrived. The diner, the apron, the name tag that said Sandra, and watched Delacourt's face do something very briefly unguarded before it sealed itself again. This is a conflict of interest, Delacourt said. She was embedded as a witness. Any findings She was embedded as an investigator, Paulette said from the head of the table, her voice even, which is within her mandate. She looked at the documents on the screen. Warren, did you authorize the use of commercial regulatory access to obtain sealed military medical records? Delacourt adjusted his cufflinks, protective due diligence in response to yes or no. A pause. The records were accessed through illegal. Mr. Callard, Paulette said, turning to Owen. You've asked to address this board. Please do. Owen stood at the end of the table, not at the head. He didn't want the head. He just needed to be standing. He had given one real speech in his life, as far as he could remember. At his wife Diane's funeral in a community center in West Kelowna, in front of 60 people, when Josie was 5 years old and sitting in the front row holding a felt rabbit she had carried everywhere that year. He had spoken for 4 minutes and said things he could not now fully recall, only that he had tried to be accurate rather than eloquent. Because Diane had been a precise person who disliked being described in generalities, he tried for the same thing now. I don't have a prepared statement, he said. I own a small HVAC company. I employ 4 people. Last night I was having dinner with my daughter and I watched a man use volume and position to make another person feel worthless in a public space. He paused. I've seen that before. Overseas it looked a specific way. In a diner in Kelowna it looks different, but it comes from the same place, from the belief that rank protects cruelty. The room was very still. You'll have in front of you documentation about my medical history from after my discharge. Those are accurate documents. I experienced significant difficulty for about 18 months after I came home. I saw a doctor. I took medication. I learned how to sleep again. He kept his voice flat and factual, the way he would describe a compressor fault to a client. I don't consider that a secret. I consider it a thing that happened and that I dealt with the way people deal with things. Delacourt made a sound, brief, dismissive. Owen turned to him. If you have something to add it. Delacourt leaned forward slightly. The board should consider whether a man with documented stress aggression is the right character witness for a compromised internal investigation. The board should consider, Owen replied, whether a man who used sealed medical records to discredit a witness is the right person to be managing 40% of the Valley's commercial properties. One of the board members, younger, to the left, set down his pen. Owen continued. I didn't know who Sandra Teal was last night. I didn't know who Delacourt was, beyond a man who thought no one would challenge him. I stood up because my daughter was watching, and I'd rather she see me lose something real than keep something comfortable. He looked at Paulette. That's all I have. He sat down. The silence lasted longer than felt comfortable. Then Sandra played the audio. It came from Gus's kitchen security backup, time-stamped unedited. Delacourt's voice filled the room, clear and cold. The comment about people staying stuck serving tables, the sound of the tray being forced from Sandra's hands, the announcement about contract cancellations, the instruction to fire her by sunrise. Nobody moved. When it ended, Paulette looked at Delacourt for a long time. Security, she said. The word was so simple, 2 syllables. It ended things the way 2 syllables sometimes do, absolutely, without ceremony. Delacourt stood. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. He shook it off, looked once around the table for someone who was still with him, and found nobody who was willing to be seen as that right now. He looked at Owen last. That same contempt, thinner now, the veneer worn down to what was underneath it, and then he walked toward the door. He had almost reached it when Sandra said quietly, Warren. He stopped. The healthcare coverage removal from the county hospital partnership. 12 years ago, the emergency approval contract. Delacourt turned slowly. That cost families, Sandra said, in this valley. People who filed insurance claims and waited 11 months because the rapid approval provision had been cut from the standard contract to save $14,000 in administrative overhead. Owen felt something shift inside his chest, slow and heavy. He had waited 11 months, while Diane's accident bills arrived in a stack that he kept in a shoebox in the closet because he couldn't look at them, while Josie was 4 years old and asking why Mommy was in the hospital. While he had called the insurance line 17 times and been told the claim was in review, in process, pending. He looked at Delacourt. Delacourt looked back and Owen saw it. Not guilt, not exactly, but the brief recognition that lands when someone understands they are being seen for something they assumed had no witnesses. That was a cost reduction measure, Delacourt said. Legal counsel signed off. You signed it, Sandra said simply. The door opened. Delacourt left. Owen sat with his hands on the table looking at the wood grain until Sandra put her hand briefly on the back of his chair, not on him, just near him, an acknowledgement rather than a comfort. I'm sorry, she said. Owen thought about Diane, about the shoebox, about Josie at 5 holding the felt rabbit sitting in the front row. It doesn't fix it, he said. No. Does he get prosecuted for it? The healthcare matter is being referred to the Provincial Review Board. There are others affected. It may take time. She paused. But it won't disappear. Owen nodded once. He had learned long ago that justice and resolution were not the same thing, that some things were simply true, and making them visible was not the same as undoing them, but it was not nothing. Outside the boardroom, the late afternoon light was doing something specific to the mountains, the long turn of the sun over the ridge, the way the valley held the last warmth of it. Owen had lived here his whole adult life, and it still stopped him sometimes. Paulette had, in the previous hour, reinstated all contractor agreements pending the full audit outcome, issued an emergency freeze on all lease retaliations, and referred the medical records breach to the Privacy Commissioner. Reed had called to say the West Side contract was back on. Sandra had arranged a guarantee of business continuity while the investigation completed. Owen held a coffee that Gus had pressed on him. Gus, who had driven 40 minutes to deliver it personally, which was either unnecessary or exactly necessary, depending on how you looked at it. Sandra came out of the building in her gray coat and stood beside him. "What happens now?" Owen asked. "For you, the company." "I go back to work," she said. "There are 46 other businesses that need what we found tonight to be applied systematically. That's 6 months minimum, and you'll do it from an office this time. From an office this time." He almost smiled. "No more double shifts, no more name tags." She looked at him sideways. "Your daughter. She's something. She told me once that the reason she draws animals is because animals don't lie about what they're feeling." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "That's a fairly sophisticated observation for a 9-year-old. "She's her mother's daughter," Owen said. He didn't say it with grief, exactly. More with pride, the kind that has been through grief and come out the other side carrying it differently. Sandra looked at the mountains. "You said some things cost more if you wait." Josie's phrase, actually. In different words. Then she's both her parents' daughter. They stood in the cooling air for a while. City noise moved around them. Somewhere down the block a restaurant was beginning its evening rush, and Owen could hear, faint and ordinary, the particular clatter of a busy kitchen getting started. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Sandra nodded. "In the diner, before you knew I'd stand up. Before any of this." He looked at her. "Were you scared?" She considered it honestly, the way she seemed to consider most things. "Not for myself. I've been in rooms with men like Delacourt enough times to know the shape of it." She paused. "I was scared about the investigation. About whether I had enough before he found out. About whether the businesses we were supposed to protect were going to survive another 6 weeks while we gathered what we needed." She looked at him. "And then a man in a work jacket stood up in a diner and handed me a different timeline." Owen thought about that. "I still need to pay my crew on Friday," he said. Sandra reached into her coat pocket and produced an envelope. Inside was a purchase order. Meridian Lakeshore Properties Compliance Division Emergency Maintenance Retainer, countywide 12 months guaranteed, signed by Sandra Teal, Chief Compliance Officer. Owen read it twice. "Walter from the diner vouched for your work," she said. "Apparently you fixed his walk-in at 2 in the morning last winter when it failed during a snowstorm. He said you wouldn't take extra for the late call. It was a gasket," Owen said. 20 minutes. He told it differently. Sandra almost smiled. "He said you stayed for pie afterward." That was true. He had stayed for pie because it was 2 in the morning and the roads were bad, and Gus was the one at this diner, different place, had insisted, and the pie was genuinely excellent, and sometimes at 2 in the morning after fixing something that needed fixing it was enough to just sit somewhere warm. "Tell Walter I said thank you," Owen said. He folded the contract and put it in his jacket pocket next to the card she had given him that morning outside Josie's school. Josie was with his neighbor Margaret until 6. He had 40 minutes. He thought he might drive up to the lookout above the valley before he picked her up, the way he sometimes did when he needed to let a day settle into something he could carry forward. He turned to Sandra. "For the record, you didn't need to come to me this morning." "I did, actually. You had the investigation." "I had the investigation," she agreed. "But you lost 6 contracts because you stood up for someone being treated badly, and I wasn't going to let that stand without." She stopped. Tried again. "Some things cost more if you wait." Owen nodded slowly. He drove to the lookout. He parked and sat for a while with the window down, letting the September air in, that particular September air of the Okanagan, dry and cool at the edges, carrying the last warmth of summer in the middle of it. The valley spread out below him, the lake flat and silver, the city arranged in its practical grid, the mountains holding everything in their unhurried way. He thought about Diane. He thought about the shoebox. He thought about Josie drawing horses in her notebook and asking questions she already half knew the answers to. He thought about a young woman in a diner apron standing very still while someone decided she wasn't worth basic decency, and the way she had looked at him when he stood up. Not with relief, not with surprise, but with something older and quieter. Recognition. The kind of look that says, "I see what kind of person you are." He drove to pick up Josie at 5:45. She was standing on Margaret's porch with her backpack on and her notebook under her arm, and she looked up when she heard his truck and ran down the steps in the way she had run since she was very small, assuming without evidence that the ground would catch her. He caught her instead. "How bad was it?" she asked, muffled against his shoulder. "Less bad than it started." She pulled back to look at his face. She had always been able to read his face better than anyone. Did it work out? He thought about the purchase order in his pocket. About Sandra Teal standing in front of 12 board members and playing 30 seconds of audio that changed the shape of a room. About Delacourte's face when the security officers reached him. About 12 years of a policy that had cost families in this valley things they could not get back, now referred to a review board that would not let it disappear. "Yeah," he said, "it worked out." Josie seemed satisfied. She took his hand and they walked to the truck, and she was already talking about something at school, a project about ecosystems, a disagreement about whether fungi counted as plants. And Owen listened, because listening to her think out loud was one of the specific reliable pleasures of his life. Later that night, Josie fell asleep reading at 7:30, which she would deny in the morning, and Owen sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the bills spread out in front of him. Most of them could wait a month now. He reached across the table and picked up Josie's drawing of the horse. She had made another one at Margaret's, apparently, a better one, and had taped it beside the first on the refrigerator that morning before school. He looked at it for a while. Outside, the town was still settling the story. The news had picked it up by dinner, Meridian executive suspended amid fraud probe, and the version they told was efficient and correct and missed almost everything that had actually mattered. People would talk about it for a few days and then stop, because that was how things went. And in the meantime, 47 small businesses would learn that the fees they had been paying into a complaint line that led nowhere were being audited and refunded, and that the lease threats that had kept them quiet were now documented in a provincial review. That was not nothing. Owen turned off the kitchen light. In the morning there would be work. 3 service calls, a parts order for the West Side job, a crew meeting he'd been putting off about equipment upgrades. In the morning, Josie would deny that she had fallen asleep reading and would need help finding one of her socks. But right now, for the first time in a long while, the silence in the house felt like rest rather than a held breath. He left the horses on the refrigerator and went to bed.